there's no grey area when it comes to a psychopath. Not all narcissists are psychopaths, but all psychopaths are narcissists. We like to make excuses for women's bad behaviour, but we don't do the same for men. Gendered couples side by side, lesbian couples have the highest rates of domestic violence, and gay couples, so two men, have the lowest rates. So two women have the highest and two men together have the lowest. I mean, that's quite telling, to be honest.
Welcome to the Brad Carr Podcast. My guest is Dr. Fiona Girkin, an expert on the minds and behaviors of female psychopaths. Dr. Fiona Girkin, let's talk about the female primary psychopath. Specifically first, what distinguishes a primary psychopath from a secondary psychopath?
Thanks, Brad. Look, it's a really interesting definition between the two. A lot of people think there's just the general term psychopath, but they're actually put into two categories. So the primary psychopath is someone who doesn't commit criminal behaviour. They're this kind of psychopath that sits in the office next to you. They're the kind of psychopath that is functional in everyday life, whereas a secondary psychopath are usually those that end up in prison and commit criminal behaviour. One of the key differences between those two types of psychopaths is the secondary psychopath is often more disorganised and often less intelligent. So those primary psychopaths are so organised and intelligent that they're often able to, I call them sleeper cells sometimes, because they can be so likeable. You know, they come into a workplace or they come into your life and you think they're an amazing person, and it can be months and sometimes even years before you see their true colours. So they're a lot more calm and poised, and they're able to hold themselves and fake things like empathy.
Mm-hmm. So you think the distinction there is intelligence?
I think it's, intelligence and an ability to control their behaviour in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a real ability to lie in wait in many ways, whereas the secondary psychopaths are a lot more reactive. And are a lot more obvious at times, whereas the primary psychopaths are a lot more covert, especially when it comes to women.
Yeah. So it sounds like then the primary psychopath, as much as it is maybe intelligence, it's also a sort of emotional control, a patience, something like that?
I think so, and a lot more manipulation, that kind of behaviour. So when you think about things like serial killers and homicides and things like that, you often see that in the secondary psychopath. Yeah, whereas the primary psychopath is someone that does fraud, manipulation, emotional manipulation, control, coercive control. So you see a lot of that in domestic violence where there isn't physical abuse, and they sit in that primary space.
Okay. So who would be some good examples of female primary psychopaths?
Yeah, look, there's some really good ones out there. Look, one of the key ones that I've done quite a bit of work on is Elizabeth Holmes. She created a company called Theranos in Silicon Valley, and she created this blood testing technology, if you're not aware of who she is, where you could, with a pinprick, you could do 100 blood tests. And she was a dropout from Stanford, so she didn't even finish her university degree. She convinced really high-level men with lots of money, very intelligent men, to be on her board and to fund her project. And she made billions and billions of dollars until it was discovered after, I think it was about 11 years, that the technology never ever worked. And when it got to the point of testing, she would use fake machines. So she'd pretend it was being tested through her machine, but she'd use those traditional big machines that you need to use to get the test done. And she was quite a tyrant in the office as well. So she would keep staff away from each other. If you threatened to tell anybody, she would have you followed. She ruled with an iron fist, but she also lied extensively and got a lot of money out of people as a result. She has now been charged with fraud, and she's in prison, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And so she said she was isolating people as well. So she's separating people, kind of compartmentalizing information.
Yeah, so that seemed to work for her, because if no one was coming together and having a discussion saying, hang on a minute, no, I saw her do this, or hang on a minute, no, that's not what we were doing, people were more likely to find out and basically dob her in around the fact that it wasn't working. So she really kept people separate.
Mm-hmm. So this behavior, it's obviously it's illegal. There's fraud involved. And yet what is it that's distinctly psychopathic?
I think it's the lack of empathy. It's a lack of not caring about how it affects other people.
Mhm.
So these people will do things that please themselves. They have like a win at all costs mentality. They do things to better their own life and they don't care who gets caught up in the rubble. So there's an example of a woman in Australia, Melissa Caddick. So she had a finance investment company and she got her friends and family to invest in her company, a similar situation really, and she had created a Ponzi scheme, but she wasn't actually investing anybody's money. She was using it to live a lavish lifestyle. So she had a big house, she had the big fast cars, she was going on holiday, she had really expensive jewelry and dresses. So there's almost a sense of entitlement, like I deserve this. I've had things happen to me, so I deserve this. And there's no real care for how that's affected other people. It's all about them. So they have no ability to self-reflect on the impact they've had on others, but the impact of their behaviour as well. And that's really key.
Mm-hmm. Now that starts to sound like narcissistic personality disorder. You've got this me, I. What do you think about the distinctions there with psychopathy, narcissistic personality disorder, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I do hear that a lot. I think the difference is people with narcissism do have some ability to self-reflect. So they do sometimes get to a point where they can go, oh, actually, I've probably not behaved the best in that situation. I've probably been a little bit selfish. So a narcissist has better ability to reflect. They still don't have a great ability to reflect, but they have some ability to reflect and change. Whereas a psychopath will never, ever, even if they realize their behavior is harmful, they'll never, ever change their behavior. The studies show that you just can't treat psychopaths because they never want to, they don't want to change, whereas a narcissist might want to change. So that's the difference. I think there's more flexibility in narcissism to make changes and to learn different behaviours. I think the other thing to remember is that narcissism is very much a core principle of the psychopath as well. So you can't have it, not all narcissists are psychopaths, but all psychopaths are narcissists.
Ooh, I have never heard
Mm,
anyone put it like that before.
mm.
How
Yeah.
did you come to that? Have you said that before? Or is that just coming
No,
now?
yeah. Yeah, I have, because it's the same with bullying, because I did a lot of work on research in bullying in the workplace. And, bullies in the workplace can be bullies. So not all bullies are psychopaths, but all psychopaths are bullies. So
Mm,
it's that sense that it's a complete, there's no grey area when it comes to a psychopath.
okay.
They are who they are. Yeah.
So the psychopath then are sort of catch-all for this dangerous behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with the female psychopath in particular, in your writing, you talked about something called a queen bee syndrome. What is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting. There's not a lot of work being done in that area. And I think I personally, the work that I did do and the reading that I did do around what was out there was that I felt like it was designed to avoid using the term female psychopath, to be honest.
Uh,
So the queen bee syndrome is all about the woman who wants to be in charge of all the other women. And it's that real sisterhood, leading the sisterhood kind of attitude. I'm in charge. They've got like minions underneath them that want to help them get whatever goal it is they're working towards. And they provide the support and the protection, I guess, for the queen bee. So that's pretty much what the queen bee is. But to me, it's just another term for, the female psychopath, to be honest.
mhm, mhm. And that one is specifically about a woman who wants to control other women.
Yeah, pretty much. But you find that with female psychopaths too, that they always have a posse around them of other women who can help and support them and protect them. So you think about the context of a workplace where someone might say, actually, Sarah's bullying me. But if Sarah's got, 5, 6, 7 women around her that say how wonderful she is and what a great job she does, it's really hard for management to understand and see that Sarah is actually not behaving appropriately because everybody loves her. So it's that sense of creating this facade of what's really going on.
Hmm. Yeah, my experience, my closest experience with a psychopath was a man, but he also collected a bunch of women to keep around him maintain
Oh.
this image, and he was buying them things, taking care of them in certain ways, and making sure that when things came back on him, that they acted as a sort of barrier, a social barrier to protect him and speak up for him. So this seems to work across both, but do you think it's more common with women?
I think it's more common with women, but I think with
Mm-hmm.
anything, these are generalizations. So I think it can be
Mm-hmm.
different in different circumstances. But that's a really interesting one. I haven't heard that before. But you think about it in the context. So male psychopaths will less likely to have that group of people around. They might have one or two, but because women are more likely to have like a sisterhood type behavior. But he obviously recognized that by having a group of women around him, it protected him. So they kind of set things up so that they are protected. And he obviously saw that as an opportunity to protect himself. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yes, and context matters. We're going to talk about it in the workplace, which is something you've studied in depth. In his context, one of his main things in life was ballroom dancing, where you are partnered with women, and so
Mm,
I think it was especially important to him that women perceive him well, and he was especially aware of his dynamics with women. But what have you
mm.
found in the workplace that stands out?
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things that I found out when I was looking at the workplace that I didn't expect. So I'd had a bad experience, which led me to doing this PhD, but I didn't realize how bad it was.
Mm,
I expected to find one or two psychopaths. I didn't expect to find as many as I did. That said, psychopathy, like any personality disorder, is on a continuum. So not everyone was at the 100%. Some were sitting around the 75%. But what I found was there was a lot more than I expected. There was a lot more damage than I ever expected. So I spoke to a number of people who had been quite suicidal. I remember one woman in particular that just completely broke my heart. She had spent two bouts in the local hospital, having attempted to take her own life as a result of the bullying she'd experienced. So that the extreme level of impact was, I think, something that was a lot more than I ever expected. I think the other key thing was I found with women that they didn't need to, in many cases, men bully down, whereas women don't. Women, when I looked at my cohort of participants, so they fit equally into three categories. They were the manager, the subordinate, or the peer. So it didn't matter what level they were at. If a woman targets another woman, it doesn't matter if she's the manager, the woman sitting next to her, or her subordinate, she will still target her because it's more about the relational stuff. So it's more about that social stuff, whether I like you or not, whether you can give me resources or I can get something from you. So women aren't as concerned with where the other woman sits when she's targeted.
So it's intuitive, I think, to assume how someone could target a subordinate. How does that female psychopath target someone who is up the chain of command, someone who's, say, their manager?
So they probably do that by undermining them. So what they would
Uh,
do is, yeah, so they'd start with, so relational aggression and gaslighting are big things for female psychopaths. So what they would do is they might start rumors. They might make a comment to someone in the earshot of the CEO or someone where they might say, oh, I saw Sarah doing this thing. I think she went home early again yesterday, and she had work to do. So really just starting rumors, not insinuating anything, but putting that seed of doubt in people's minds, and really isolating that person and undermining their authority. And you'd be surprised how easy that is for psychopaths to do because when you're making up lies, they're endless. The truth is very
yeah.
small, but lies are endless. So you can pretty much make up anything. And you don't have to actually say, uh, uh, say the full context. You just have to say enough to put the seed of doubt in somebody's mind. So that's pretty much how they do it. They try and undermine the person so people no longer respect them. So the higher management or the board no longer respect them. So they start to doubt them. And then that person, it creates that gaslighting effect where that person then starts to doubt themselves as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Years ago, I knew a woman who was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and I didn't know it at the time. And with that point about lying, what she could do was she could just say someone's name and then get upset and start to cry. And people would just fill in the blanks. They would just make assumptions about what's going on there, how it must be affecting her. Oh, this poor woman, the things that she's been through, it must be terrible.
Mm.
So when you said that, what was it? The lying knows no bounds,
Yes. Yeah.
something like that. You know, It's there. It's powerful.
Yeah, it's
So
endless. You can
yeah,
come up with
endless.
anything.
That's what it is. It's endless. It's endless. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to share what your experience was that triggered this?
Yeah, happy to. So my experience was I was managing an organization, a feminist organization. They, at the time, uh, I was, I'm going to try and leave too many details out because I don't want to get myself in
Sure.
trouble. Um, at the time, I was engaging with the service to help them with some workplace issues, and they were looking for a new, essentially a CEO role, but they called it a management role. And they said, we need you to come in and help with this. We'd love you to take on this job. So, they patted my ego quite a bit, and I'd known this service quite well, and I thought, yep, I can come in and fix this problem. This is, a workplace issue. There's some behavioural issues. There's some staff behaving badly. I can come in and fix this. I can sort this out. I'll find out what's going on. So I took on the job. I reported directly to the board and I looked after the staff. But what I found out very quickly was that the board were the problem, not the staff. And the board had appointed someone who was previously on the board, but also best friends with two people on the board as well, had put them in the service to basically spy on everybody. And initially, her and I got along very well, and she played the victim very well. She was the one that said, I'm being bullied because people think I'm spying on them because I'm friends with the board. And I really stuck up for her, and she was like my second in charge in many ways. And it became apparent very quickly that she was the problem and that her behaviour was extremely toxic. She was manipulating staff. She would call members of the board in the open office and laugh and go, oh, what are you doing on the weekends? So she'd make sure people knew who her friends were. And she basically used the office like her second home. She used the word credit card like it was her bank account. And she could do that because I tried to take her to task, and she ended up going on workers' comp and said that I had been bullying her. And in Australia, we have what's called Fair Work, and Fair Work just threw the whole thing out and said, this is ridiculous. You were just doing your job. And yeah, in the end, I ended up having to leave because she then lied about me. When she came back, she said I was stalking her and driving past her place, which I was not. There was a number of other things she said, and in the end, I just went, you know what, I don't need this. So I ended up resigning, which is what happens to a lot of people. You just kind of get to that point where you go, you know what, do I want to fight this? Do I want to be the martyr and fight this and win? Or do I just want to walk away and not deal with this? And I think for me, I've had a lot of things go on in my life which have changed me in terms of putting up with that crap. So I have a very short threshold for putting myself through misery because I think life's too short for that. So yeah, so that was my experience. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think changed that threshold? Was it maybe something like just understanding that there are people like this, or did that come later?
Yeah, look, my father got sick, so that was what turned things for me, that it was more important for me to be with him, but also to, I knew, because where I live in Tasmania, I knew that if I had stayed, the damage to my reputation would have been way worse. So the trouble is with these people, especially in certain industries, um, it doesn't just affect the workplace. And this was certainly something I found in my research as well. And a number of people have said this to me, that they've actually left the state because they can't work here anymore in the community sector, simply because these people don't just target within that workplace. They start then spreading their seed of doubt throughout that industry, and then you can no longer get a job. So it's not contained in any way. So you've got to be really, really careful as to how far you want to take it. And I often say that to clients. I say, what do you want out of this? Are you able to leave, or do you want to fight this? But this is the consequences of that, because they won't stop. They are relentless. They are
Mhm.
relentless.
And in your work, you use the phrase relational aggression, which we've talked about a little bit now. Just to
Yep.
clarify, what is that? How does it differentiate the female psychopath's behavior from maybe the males?
Yeah, so relational aggression is pretty much non-physical aggression, and it's all around the social aspect of your relationships. So if you think about the fact that, you're in a social group and they all decide to go out and do something, but you get left out. So that's for deliberately left out, not by accident. So deliberately left out, there might be rumors and gossip that gets spread about you, those kind of things that basically demean your social standing. So people think less of you as a result of the things that are being said about you. They isolate you, those kind of behaviors. So it's about affecting you socially.
Hmm. Yeah. And you had an interesting observation in your writing about that kind of behavior and how some people, like you said, it's about getting left out, but some people end up getting defended by the psychopath because they're still playing along with the game. So a quote from your writing, another study also found that maintaining a good relationship with the psychopathic leader protected subordinates from being targeted as long as they were willing to be manipulated and support the leader's bad behavior. So how does that play out?
Yeah. So if you think about it, it's a bit like the eye of the storm, really. You think about a tornado in the eye, it's supposed to be really calm, and it's much the same. If you're near the psychopath and they're getting something from you, because you're protecting them in some way, they they will protect you. So really, the closer you are to them, the better, because they're not going to target you because they're going to see you as an ally, not so much as a friend, but as an ally, because they don't really have too many friends. They have fake friends, I think, just because they're getting something from them. So that's the difference. And certainly there's a lot of studies that have been done around that. It was interesting. There was one interview I did for my study where a woman observed someone who had been severely bullied, who had to take a lot of leave, and when she came back over the course of a few weeks, she actually became the target of bullying, became friends with the psychopath who'd bullied her, and then they started working together to bully others. And I thought that was really interesting. It's almost like in some ways some of that toxic behaviour can be contagious. And if it means you're safe from the bullying, I think sometimes people think it's easier to do that than to be the target.
Mhm. Yeah, and while you may not be the target of the bullying, you will still be the target of the psychopath, I would think. Even if you're close to them, I mean, they're not going to start really caring for you, I don't think.
No, no, because basically if, once you get to the point where they don't need you anymore or you're a threat to them in some way. So for example, there might be a job coming up, and they want the job, but so do you, and you got to put in for it as well, then suddenly you're a threat because you could impact their ability to get this promotion. So yeah, so that like I said, it's fake friendship really, because at any point when they don't need you anymore, they'll turn.
Hmm.
And the worst thing is, because you've been so close to them, they know a lot about you, a hell
Oh,
of a
yeah.
lot about you. And that's what happened to me with my experience before I did my PhD, was that this person that had been pretty much my second in charge knew a lot about me, and she used that against me.
Yeah. Yeah. Likewise, the one who I knew, we were side by side for months. And so you can just imagine, yeah, all the
Mm,
information. You talked about how it's
yep.
contagious. There was a
Mm,
phrase in your writing, psychopathic transference.
mm.
What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's almost as though that sense of because they want the psychopaths to like them, they start behaving. It's high school behavior, really, when you think about it. You know, well, you want the psychopath to like you, one, because they are very likable. You actually want to be friends with them, usually early on, especially. So you start to mimic their behavior. I mean, there's lots of studies done on, you basically become the people that you spend most of the time with. So if you are spending
Hmm.
a lot of time with a psychopath, you're starting to mimic their behavior. So it's that real transference effect where you start becoming a little bit apathetic to other people and not caring as much. And people might be witnessing how the psychopath is getting what they want by being this cold or unempathetic or not caring who they hurt to get what they want. So it's almost like they start to behave in similar ways,
Hmm.
which kind of fits into that sort of more sociopathic area, which is more of learned psychopathic behavior.
How is that?
So sociopaths are often, they learn the behavior. I don't use that term because I think it waters it down. I use psychopath simply because I don't like watering it down. The damage these people do is quite extensive, and I don't think you get to have a lesser term. And I think people often use sociopath for women because it is a softer term. It's a softer term, but I mean, they do say that sociopaths can change, whereas psychopaths cannot. So that's why I think it fits into that learned category, because if it's something they've learned, it's something they can unlearn.
Mm-hmm. Now, the psychopathic transference, we would say that is learned. It rubs off on you from someone else. Is that more common with women?
Oh, yes, definitely. So
Oh,
women, we care a lot more about relationships and being liked than men. So in my research, I know there was a guy I spoke to about what he had witnessed, and he was saying how he'd worked with this woman who clearly finished that category, but he'd seen how women and men had interacted with the psychopath, and he'd said that there was a man in that team who had realised that by making himself useless and not having any resources that she wanted, she left him alone. So he kind of almost backed away. I think about that image of Homer Simpson moving into the hedge and disappearing. If anyone's seen that before, and that's what I think about him. He just disappeared into the background, so she just didn't care what he was up to anymore. Whereas when women are rejected by the women, we are so hurt. We want to know why, and we will fight a lot harder to make someone like us. So that then transfers into that toxic behaviour, in that if someone rejects us, then we get really, really upset and really, really angry, and from a psychopathic perspective, really, really nasty.
mhm. So it seems in your research that the relational stakes for women are distinct, and that becomes an important trigger for the female psychopath to use against other women?
I think so. I mean, relational aggression is often being called a female trait. I mean, men do use it. I mean, I found that male psychopaths will use it against a woman because they see that as a really
Mm,
good tactic for women. So it's not that they use relational aggression as much. It's just that I think they see that as, okay, that's a tactic that really affects women, so I'm going to use that. But it's definitely classed as a female. Women use it a lot more than men because
mhm,
we care so much about relationships.
yeah. The term flying monkeys seems to come up around this idea of the people who get close to the psychopath. What do you think about that, or what else have you learned about people who collaborate, so to speak, with the psychopath?
Look, and I think, like I said, psychopathy is on a continuum. So, some of these people I think that gravitate to the psychopath might have low level traits, and they might see the psychopath as someone who's really successful, because usually they are. They're willing to do whatever it takes to get what they want. So they see them as someone who, if they get close to them, they might be able to get something as well. So, okay, if she gets a promotion, then I might get to be her 2IC. I might get to be her second in charge. So I think some people are drawn in by that idea. And power and control are very alluring. Power and control are very uh, toxic in some ways, in that they kind of suck you in. And I think people get drawn into that. So they think, oh, well, okay, I want to get what she wants too. And the way we teach women these days about go after what you want, it's all about you, what you need. So I think we're promoting that narcissistic behavior in women. So I think we're seeing a lot of low-level psychopaths and narcissists that do gravitate to this behavior.
You think that societal messages are sort of fertile ground for that, or
Oh,
an
yes.
impetus to that?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I think it's created a level of unhappiness within women that's really obvious, and really sad, because if you're only thinking about yourself all the time, it can be a pretty lonely space eventually. And you're seeing now a lot of older feminists getting into their 50s and 60s and being alone, and realizing that they've created this world where they're focused on themselves so much they're now alone, and they're about to retire, and they've got no one to spend their life with. So um, I think that selfishness that comes from the psychopath, I think, is creating some of these traits through how we teach women to value themselves so much that they devalue everyone else.
hmm Well, this kind of answers a question from the audience, actually. That your topic is juicy, so people submitted some questions. When asked, do you see any connection between the roots of the feminist movement and female psychopaths?
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. So it's surprising that So my experience was in a feminist service and with all women. And so when I looked at the studies I did and more observations, I spent a lot of time talking with people who'd worked in feminist services, who'd worked with all women. And I really saw a lot of that toxicity that you just don't see in mixed organizations or male organizations. I'm not saying that men can't be toxic, but I'm just saying there's a real level of um, harm that's done, and it's underpinned by that feminist movement that says, women are all good and need more power. And what we've seen is a real feminization of society that I think is really impacting how we function as a society. And part of that is because women are very risk averse. Women care more about caring, whereas men are more strategic. Let's get it done. If we're building a road, the man's like, right, what do we need to do? We need this, this, and this. These are the products we need. This is the equipment we need. Whereas a woman, from a feminized perspective, it might be, oh, but how's it going to affect the animals? What about the neighbours? Is there going to be noise? Who do we need to let know? Let's do a risk assessment. So it all becomes very very hard to get anything done in a feminist service because everyone has to have a say, everyone has to feel protected, there has to be trigger warnings, everyone has to wear their victim badge so we know where they sit. Now I'm on my soapbox. But yeah, so I think the feminist movement has done some really positive things for women, but I think it's also really harmed women in a lot of ways. And I think it's changed society so dramatically that I think we're now harming our children as a result. We see young mums, they don't have the option to raise their children. I'm a grandmother, and my oldest daughter just had her third little boy, and she's going to have 6 months off and have to go back to work, and she's already extremely sad because she wants to stay home and raise him, but she can't. We've created a society where everybody has to work to survive, and I think that kind of damage that the feminist movement has done, we've created a society where it's so expensive to live these days that you've both got to work that you can't actually be a mum, and I think that's really sad.
Mhm. This also ties to another question from the audience about mothers and female psychopaths. If psychopathy is transferable, will female psychopaths transfer that to their children?
I think they can. I also think, well, it depends on whether it's, if it's, we often learn the behaviour that we grow up in. So I think if it's not ingrained in you to be a psychopath, if it's not in your genetics, I think that you can learn that in the home from the way that you are treated. And I think it creates an environment that says that this is what the real world is like, and that if I'm not ruthless, I won't survive. So I think mothers who are psychopathic and narcissistic, and I've worked with a number of clients who've been raised by psychopaths and narcissistic mothers, and it's really sad the damage that does, especially those that are very. There was one client in particular whose mother hated men, and he was a man, and the way she treated him was just absolutely appalling, and constantly told him how worthless he was, even as a very young child, because he was a man. Um, I mean, it sounds like he's got his life together, but I think you can learn that behaviour. I think it can be ingrained in you. Um, I think if it's not part of your DNA in terms of you have the opportunity to change, I think the sooner these people get away from that environment, the better, because then you might have the opportunity to learn new ways of interacting with people. So, but yes, it can be passed down between generations.
Mm. And as far as getting away, which you just mentioned, um, maybe just in broader strokes, what could we do to identify that someone is a female primary psychopath so we can stay away?
Yeah, so there's some really key things to look out for. So the inability to self-reflect. So something might happen that is their fault and they blame someone else. They might take credit for something else someone else has done. They are very charming and likable, but there's that underlying lack of care. There's an underlying lack of empathy. So I don't actually really care about you, but I can fake it so that you think I like you or you think I care about you. But the key things are that I always say to people, the ability to not be able to self-reflect. to take credit for other people's good things, but never ever go, actually, I made a mistake. Never actually apologize for anything they do. Um, and never do anything that doesn't benefit them. You know, they're never altruistic in any way. And if they do it, they make sure everybody knows about it. So look how good I am. So they're the kind of things you need to look out for. And it is really about some of those words that and things they do and how do they use their behavior? Do they use their behavior for good? Um, but yeah, wanting to, when they are doing, because I've done a lot of study on people who work in the caring industry. So there's that real notion of heroism, you know, the firefighter that starts the fire so he can rescue people. It's that same notion. Look what I've done. Look how wonderful I am. I've cared for these people. So you've got to be careful of that as well. Is it genuine care or is it look how good I am? And you need to praise me for the work I've done.
Yeah. There were 4 themes that emerged in one part of your research. If we could go a little deeper on each of them.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. First one, primary psychopathic behaviors in females are often disguised behind relationships, friendships, and victimhood, which we've started to talk about. Anything in particular from your research that comes to mind with that?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about that, you know, that sisterhood and having a group of women around them to support them. But the victimhood thing is really interesting. So you'll see, you mentioned the woman that would cry, say a name and cry. It's much that kind of behaviour. So when women start to get found out, they play the victim. Oh, I'm a victim of past abuse. I've been bullied. I'm having troubles at home. My husband's left me. So they'll start wearing all these what I call victim badges. I need to make some victim badges. It'd be funny. Oh, this is the badge I'm wearing today. Oh, this is what's wrong with me. I'll feel sorry for me because immediately people move to that space of, oh, are you okay? Are you all right? So by being a victim, we can't criticize someone. It's almost like we suddenly have to be nice to them. So the victimhood thing was really, really common. There was one woman I spoke to who tried to address the behavior with the psychopath. And she just started crying. Oh, I didn't realize what I'd done. I'm so sorry. And it was funny how she said it was just empty. The woman was crying, but there was nothing there. She just clearly did not care, but she was faking that I care attitude.
Yeah, I think that's how you ended your thesis was a quote on that. Is that the one that you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I pulled it because I thought it was so powerful and it reminded me
Mm,
so much of my own experience with sort of looking into the inner world of
yeah,
this person whom I was around. So I'll just read it.
yeah, sure.
You sort of reach into someone a little bit, like you reach into their space, and you try and sense what's behind their words, or their intentionality, or the feeling that you're getting. Usually, you might find a whole bunch of stuff. Even if people are hiding something, there's a feeling of that they're putting it behind something else. What I got when I talked to her was like a white, cloudy mist, and I didn't know how far it went. I sort of would reach into it. You might find something you think, oh, what's that? A feeling she's trying to hide in there? But it was totally empty. Like it was creepy empty. And there would just be this sense of emptiness because the mist did kind of fill it up. I felt entirely lost. There was no directionality. There was no deliberate walls. It was just misty, and it didn't seem to have a finish. Monsters live in mist.
I know, isn't that amazing? She was an amazing person to interview because she was very spiritual. And she just described it. When she said that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's it.
Yes.
It's that they display the same kind of emotions a normal person does, but it's empty. There's nothing behind us. You know, if anyone who's watched the interviews with the woman from Victoria who killed her family with toxic mushrooms, and there's times where the camera crews from the local news were talking to her outside her house, and she's crying and saying, this is horrible that this has happened. I'm so sorry this has happened, but not taking any responsibility. But she was crying, but there was no tears. She would wipe her eyes and then she would look at her hand to see if there was tears. And that's a perfect example of someone showing emotion. I'm the victim. Oh my God, I can't believe it's happened. It was a complete accident, but absolutely empty. There's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing there whatsoever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another phrase around these people that comes to mind, I'm not sure if it's credited to Bob Hare, is something like they know the words but not the music. Maybe that was a Herbie Cleckley thing. I'm not sure. You've heard
Yeah,
that?
I'm not sure, but I think I have heard that before. I'm not sure where but
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that sense that something is just missing in there, and
Mm,
the monsters live in the mist. I mean, that one stuck with me.
I
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Stephen King writes an
Yeah.
incredible short story called The Mist, where all these monsters emerge from the mist, and
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, you can just feel it. The idea there, it's very powerful.
I
The
must admit,
person you
that was
talked to must have been fascinating.
she was, and I spoke to her for a couple of hours, but I've seen the mist, and I thought when she mentioned that, I thought the same thing, and I almost visualized this monster coming out of the mist and was like, wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Another theme, female primary psychopathic behavior included dishonesty, relational aggression, manipulation, and gaslighting. What else on that?
Yeah, so we've talked about some of those things, so relational aggression and gaslighting, but that manipulation, that level of manipulation, and all these traits are very covert. They're not often overly obvious. And I think that's the hard thing is that they're often hard to spot because someone might say something and pretend it's from a caring perspective. Oh, so you're managing that project? Do you know how to do that? I'm a bit worried about you. That sounds like it'd be really stressful for you. When really underlying it might be, I actually want to manage that project. So I'm going to pretend that I think you can't do it to undermine you so that you start to doubt your own skills. So it's that sense of pretending to care, but they don't. And that real manipulation that was really obvious.
Hmm. What do you
Mm.
think manipulation is?
Um, I think manipulation is the opportunity to control someone else, to use your power over someone else, to use information you know about them against them, and to get what you want out of them. And it's not always obvious. I think it's very covert, but I think it's very dangerous because I think manipulating others is very much an aggressive trait, but it's so covert that sometimes it's hard to determine whether you're being manipulated or not, and that's the hard thing.
Yeah. To your point about the power over others not necessarily being clear. I mean, you mentioned that a subordinate can manipulate a manager, and at first that seems kind of strange. But when you start to think, well, the manager really depends on the subordinate. The manager is going to tell their manager, "We're going to get this thing done," but if the subordinate stalls the project, it hurts the manager. I mean, it can work in all kinds of directions when you're in relationships with people, and it seems as long as you're
Yeah.
tethered to someone, there is the possibility.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it. And often the sad thing is one of the things that I found, and that I've found over time is that the safest place to be in a workplace in particular is not being friends with anybody. And that's
Yep,
really sad
it is.
because that's a really lonely place to be in a workplace because, you need those relationships. You spend a lot of time with these people. It's really important. But the closer you get to people that are psychopathic, the more dangerous it is because they learn too much about you. So it's a really, um, yeah, really interesting space and a really sad uh, world that we live in where that's the solution is to not be friends with people. But yeah.
Yeah. Another theme of your four, this is number three. Target of female primary psychopathic behavior is psychologically, emotionally, professionally impacted. And what about that?
Mm. Many of the people I spoke to were affected professionally. So people saying they no longer want to work in Tasmania. They People had spread rumours throughout the industry they worked in, which I mentioned. The suicidality was a massive problem. People feeling suicidal, feeling like they have no hope because, they can't leave because they need to pay their mortgage. But also, if they do, how are they going to get another job given the damage that's been done? There was one person in particular I spoke to who'd left a very toxic workplace where she'd been bullied by a psychopath. She'd gone to a new workplace and things were going really well. Then Then she discovered that the new manager was actually best friends with the psychopath she'd worked with before. So the psychopath also found this out and would start coming into her workplace to visit her friend, making sure she stopped past this woman she'd bullied and say hello to her with a nickname that she hated. And this would happen quite regularly. And eventually she ended up having to leave this second workplace as a result. But that was not the only case where I heard that kind of behaviour. Like I said, a number of people have left the state saying, I can't work here anymore because these people have spread such rumours about me that nobody wants to employ me because certainly in Tasmania, the feminist movement and the community sector are very powerful, and I think they have a lot of pull. So if you don't get along with the right people, you're out of a job,
Hmm.
basically. Mm.
And what else is it about Tasmania that seemed to be part of your work too? Is it something about the population or the type of work that people were doing?
um, I think, well, because I've worked in the community sector here for over 20 years,
And maybe
I think
what
it's
is the community sector?
yeah, of course. So it's like counselling, family support. It's where all the psychologists and social workers work. It might be support for people who experience sexual violence or family violence. It's those therapeutic, caring industries that make up the family support, the com- community support sector. So in Tasmania, we're very much like a small country town. So if you live in a small country town, you know that everybody knows everybody. Gossip and rumours. Everyone knows everyone else's business. And Tasmania is very much like that. And although our population's grown a lot since I moved here 25 years ago, it's still there. And especially in any industry, will certainly. I know the community sector industry, it's so small. Everybody knows everybody. Everyone, when you change jobs, you know the new people you're working with. So it's easy for things to spread. It's easy for rumours to spread. It's easy for bad information to spread. So I always think about it, yeah, like a small country town. That's
Yeah,
really the best way to explain it.
yeah. And we've talked a little bit about how suicidality can be part of the impact of this. What else would you like people to know about the impact it can have on the target? I think it's important because the target will probably be painted as the problem in a lot of these situations. So
Yes.
what are we looking for? What even distinguishes that person?
Yeah, and this is the big problem because often psychopaths can be very calm and very
Yes.
poised and very much liked by management because they look like they're getting a lot of work done when really other people are probably doing it for them. So when someone complains about them, people find it hard to believe. And I think then what happens is people get frustrated. So the target gets frustrated. And I've been there myself where you end up behaving badly because you just get so you're like a child throwing a tantrum because you're just like, nobody's listening. Nobody's listening to me. I don't know what's going on. And that was certainly something a lot of people have said to me in my work and in my research is that you get to the point where you then become the problem because you put in a complaint or you complain about this person because they're well liked, because they've positioned themselves in that way. They're well liked by the right people. To then have to deal with that, often what happens is the person that's being bullied then becomes disciplined, then becomes the one that's taken to task and told they're the one that's misbehaving, that they're undermining their manager, that they're undermining the work, that they're just complaining, and in many cases are often the one that's ended up being disciplined rather than the person with the bad behavior. And that's really, really common,
Hmm.
sadly.
So what is done to even distinguish between, who's sort of at fault here and who's not and how to even sort that out?
That's an interesting question because one of the things that I continue to find in working with clients is that organizations and businesses are really crap at dealing with psychopathic behavior and bad behavior. They're really bad at it. So they would rather get rid of the person that's struggling, that's having mental health episodes as a result of being bullied, than to get rid of the person that seems calm and
Yeah.
organized and confident. So I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done in that space. That is the one point that we could improve on. I think organisations need to get better at not giving power to people that are going to abuse it, and I think that's really the key. Is one to do their analysis properly, to check people out before they employ them, and if they do employ someone that is a bully or psychopathic in any way, that they ensure that they have balances and checks in place to make sure they don't gain that level of power that can escalate their behavior. Because that's really key is they can, like I said early on, that they can be a real sleeper cell and seem quite okay, and it's not until they're given power. There's a great quote by Abraham Lincoln that says, if you want to see a man's true character, give him power. And I love that because that is so true. I've seen that in so many people where they seem like good people, and as soon as they gain power, and you see this in a lot of politicians too, as soon as they get power, they just suddenly become a completely different person because power is very intoxicating.
Hmm. So what is the value in employing a psychopath in the first place? Sometimes people will say things like, well, they can make tough decisions or not be so emotional, or maybe they're good surgeons because they're not bothered by, affecting people's bodies in a certain way. It, but it seems that the trade-offs aren't there. I wonder what you think.
Yeah, look, that's an interesting question I get asked a lot. And people are two schools of thought about it. People say, oh, you shouldn't, and some people will say, well, you should. But I actually believe there is a place for them. And that's probably a bit controversial. But having been in management positions myself, I'm a very empathetic person. And that really impacted my ability to do my job at times, especially if I was being manipulated by someone who was emotional. Um, I think that, if a psychopath can come in and fire 100 people during a downsizing and still sleep at night, well, then maybe they're the best person to do that. Whereas, someone else might find that so stressful they end up in therapy for 6 months. So I think there's a place. And you mentioned surgeons. Yep, a lot of surgeons are psychopaths because they're focused on the task. They're not focused on the emotion. They're not focused on the family in the waiting room crying their eyes out. They're just getting the job done. So I think there's a place for people to just get the job done. But it's that trade-off, like you said, what's the consequences of that? I know there's been surgeons who is it Dr. Death we called him I don't know whether he was in Australia, but, if patients died, he just didn't care. I think he was a surgeon. I'm not 100% sure. So there's that side of things. They might go out and tell the family, I didn't make it. You know, sorry. Whereas, someone who's a little bit has a little bit more empathy might come out and provide condolences and that kind of thing. So I think that's where, having someone with lower level psychopathic traits on that continuum rather than 100% is where there's a safe zone. And it's about choosing the right person for the job that fits and maybe has some of those traits to get that tough stuff done.
Okay, to be clear, a low level, we're looking for very particular psychopathic traits, maybe the lack of emotionality being a key to that.
Yeah, yeah. So, if you think about, like I said, if you're firing 100 people, you need some level of emotion to go, look, I'm really sorry. Um, you know, I know this is tough, but, we're not able to keep you on. So having some level of empathy, if someone was at 100%, they might say, well, your job's gone. Sorry, we don't bother coming in tomorrow. So it's about how they, some level of empathy and some level of self-reflection on what they say might impact someone, I think is really important. But I think you could get a balance, definitely.
Hmm.
Definitely.
Now, what about the psychopathic sort of tendency to want to be the hero, to make trouble, to stir things up? I'm thinking of a surgeon who might nick a patient just to be the hero.
Mm, possibly. Yeah, and that's possibly it. And we talked about um, the firefighter
Yes.
who, sets the house on fire to then rescue people
Yes.
and become the hero.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
and
letting
that's
a
the
person
same
like that in
thing.
your organization.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's certainly what I've seen in the community sector. So I did interviews, but I also did a survey throughout Australia, and yeah, that sense of, and it wasn't until I was nearly finished my study that it dawned on me that I started looking into that idea of heroism, and it dawned on me that because I was like, why are psychopaths working in a field that needs empathy, that cares about it? Actually didn't make a lot of sense to me, and it kind of dawned on me, and I went, hang on a minute. These people have a lot of control over resources for people. You take, for example, a crisis service who provides housing, who provides food, who provides support in lots of different ways. And these workers have the ability to give or take that away at any point. They have complete control. Same with nursing. Nursing is a very toxic industry. And same thing, they have the ability to administer the right medication, no medication, or too much. That's a lot of control over someone. That's control over someone's life and health. So I think there is more reason for psychopaths to move into a caring profession than I ever thought initially when I started my work. And certainly for women, because it's a good place to hide, whereas a woman's less likely to hide in a industry that's a corporate field. I think it's easy for a nurse to hide in a caring profession.
Hmm. Yes, we assume, I think, that there's this sort of snakes in suits type of corporate psychopath, and that's where they're
Mm.
going to go because there's money, there's glamour, maybe they're in finance or they're managing lots of people. But your point is that some people could be managing resources for people in need that are life and death.
Yeah.
Nurses, these community
Mm.
services, as you say, and these are people who don't have other options either. I mean, that
Yeah.
corporate manager who's a psychopath, maybe that person is very skilled, the target is very skilled, and they could quit tomorrow and go find something else. But if you're at the end and this is your last resource, I mean, that person's got a real hold on you.
Yeah. And we've certainly seen that in Australia in the disability sector. So we outsourced, so disability sector 10 years ago used to be run by the government and it got outsourced to the private sector. And we've had massive issues with fraud and abuse in the disability sector and people with disability being taken advantage of because you don't need any qualifications to do it. So, you don't even need a degree of any description. You barely need to go to high school. So it's a really easy place for someone who is a psychopath that hasn't done all the work to hide and to make lots of money by disadvantaging people that need support.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Garkin, a fourth theme from your work, the fourth theme, female primary psychopathic behaviors included treating others with disdain and judgment and a lack of empathy. We've been talking a lot about empathy, but what else
Mm.
on that?
Yeah, so the disdain was really interesting. That was a term I heard a number of times from different people in my research, and that real sense of, eye rolling and really kind of that attitude towards someone that what they've done is inappropriate or not up to standard and really kind of judgmental. And that can be really hurtful, especially if you've done something that you think's quite good or you've done a really great job. I remember someone telling me about, it was a client recently telling me about how a colleague had been working on this project and the psychopathic person had come in and criticized how it was set up in the document. And it was really hurtful for this person because it wasn't that bad by the sound of it, but they wanted to make a point of they're like, "Oh, I just want to help you. I'd like it to look better." So pretending they're caring, but really just criticizing the work of somebody else to make them, it's that relational aggression again, to make them feel crap about themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. You started to make faces that I think kind of say it all. It's sort of this haughty sort of, nose up in the air kind of thing. And we all know it.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
there's something about it that's there. I've dealt with one obviously, and somebody else mentioned him to me a few days ago, and we weren't on the same page about things or anything. I don't think she even knew that I knew him, and she said, and he was just so, and she just kind of did that face. She kind of puffed out her chest and put her nose up, and so, there is that looking down on others, and then it seems to be connected to the gaslighting too, because
Mm,
especially if this person has been your friend or your manager or whatever,
mm,
and you've been getting along, and then that person whom you trust starts to look down on you. Well, then you start to think,
mm,
maybe I'm losing it. Maybe I'm not as good as I used to be. Or, they must be right. Or, why would my friend or my manager be lying to me? It must be true. And so then it shakes the person's confidence in their own judgment.
yeah. Yeah, and they don't even need to say that directly. If you start to damage someone's confidence, then they start to behave differently. So if you start to behave less confident, then other people will start to treat you differently. It's a flow-on effect. So they know what they're doing. It's really quite calculated.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think we've talked about the prevalence of these people. How common do you think they are?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because I think a lot of the studies show 1% of psychopaths and that's in the criminal field. But there's been studies that have said that it's as high as sort of 15%. And I would have to agree with that. I think it's probably 10 to
Really?
15%, especially in the primary psychopathic sector. Oh, definitely. And I think it's increased dramatically since social media has come about. I think, like I was saying earlier on, that, I think we're creating narcissistic behavior, but it's an echo chamber for some of that victimhood behavior. And I think it's creating people that care about no one but themselves and only care about attention for their victim badges.
Okay, let's break this down because I've seen statistics that suggest that there are different rates in men and women. you've been studying women specifically. So
Mm.
maybe as high as 15%. Is that different between men and women? Is that strictly of the secondary psychopath, or is that all of them?
Look, I mean, obviously, I specifically study the primary psychopath, but I do some work in the secondary psychopath. Um, I think it's much the same. I
Mhm.
know that people would say, "Oh no, men are Heinz." No, the problem is that the tools were created based on men. The tools came from so the tools that Cleckley and Hare did. They're all based in the work with men and incarcerated populations. So they did some work with women, but not a huge amount. So the problem is that you've got tools that don't allow for things like relational aggression. And these things are really important to understanding the female psychopath, that covert nature. I mean, there's a lot of tools out there that do measure psychopathy. I have considered, looking at it another method, but I think it's more about willful blindness in some ways. I think we don't like to see women as bad. So I don't think, I mean, the tools are part of the problem, but I also think part of it's that we like to make excuses for women's bad behavior, but we don't do the same for men. So if a woman behaves psychopathically, we might suggest that there's something that's gone on for her that's made her do that. So she's, killed her husband or hurt her husband in some way in domestic violence. So they might say, oh, well, she was abused herself by him or she was abused as a child. Whereas if a man does it, we just say, he's a horrible person. So I think there's a lot more excuses we make for women than we do for men in many
Mhm.
ways.
And did you say you think the rates are the same across men and women?
I think so.
Mhm.
It's certainly something I've done a bit of work in the domestic violence space. It's certainly something I've seen in that space. We're seeing a lot of cases of women coming out now behaving much like the traits of bad men, hurting their partners, committing domestic violence, those kind of things. So domestic violence is equally men and women, but you don't hear that very often. That's how you lose your job, by saying that. So you've got to be really careful about that. And again, it's that sense of, well, okay, women might commit it at the same rates. Oh, but what happened to them? Are they okay? Maybe he started it, which is not the case. Women usually start domestic violence. The research is there, it's just quite hidden, which is really common as well. So.
I've never heard anything like this. You said it's quite hidden. Could you explain more?
So there's been a lot of work done by a gentleman by the name of Murray Strauss, but there's a number of other researchers that have done a lot of work. Erin Peasy, who started the first women's refuge, she talks a lot about this issue. I've done a few videos on YouTube about it as well. So I used to teach domestic violence to the police. And it was something that I did talk a little bit about, not to the extent that I talk about it now, because I'm able to do that as a private consultant. But the more research I've done, the more I've found on this issue. And I've worked in this space for a long time and didn't know a lot of this stuff. It was only that I'd started to witness it in my work that I started to talk more about it. And then when I stopped working in the domestic violence space, I started to do more research on it. And yeah, there's a lot of work out there. So women usually instigate domestic violence. If you put the different gendered couples side by side, lesbian couples have the highest rates of domestic violence, and gay couples, so two men, have the lowest rates. So two women have the highest, and two men together have the lowest. I mean, that's quite telling, to be honest. The research also shows that women do instigate the violence initially. And often men are protecting themselves if the woman's being violent, but of course it comes across as, oh, she was just protecting herself. So I think the problem is it's the way we've recorded a lot of stats internationally around these issues that has skewed what we think about domestic violence. I mean, there are cases of one party or the other being very lopsided. But you look at the case of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. I mean, that's a perfect example. That really it was quite the controversy and quite a lot of debate around who was at fault and whether he was the abuser or she was the abuser. But that was quite an equal violence between the two, but it was about how you saw that. And I know a lot of domestic violence groups saw it as she was the victim and she was just protecting herself, whereas many believed that was bilateral violence, and that's usually the case in many domestic violence situations, but we don't talk about it.
Hmm. Wow. And you mentioned issues in the tools that are used. So let's clarify that. So a lot of people look at the Robert Hare's psychopathy checklist, the
Mm.
PCLR.
Yep.
That was initially done using research on male inmates.
Hmm.
So these are strictly men, and they probably don't have the same relational access, even for things like relational aggression, if they wanted to use that because they are
Yep.
isolated in the prison system. So then that has been extrapolated out to the corporate environment sometimes, I think, but then there's criticism of that. I know that you use Clyde Body's research, and I
Hmm.
believe he was part of your PhD program as well.
Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
does that play in? How did you choose that tool, and where are we going with these tools?
Yes, I was very careful about what tool I used, and I mean, I suppose I was a little bit swayed by Clive because Professor Body, amazing man who went into bat for me when I couldn't get my research accepted because nobody wanted to study female psychopaths, and so I ended up using his tool because what I found was a lot of the studies that have been done in the corporate sector were using his tool, and it's not a clinical tool. So there's a lot of arguments around, oh, well, you shouldn't be using it outside a clinical setting, that you only use it when you've spent a significant amount of time with someone. I disagree with that because I think it's about looking at the behaviors. I think it's not about diagnosing people. And I always say that to people. I'm not diagnosing anybody. That's not what it's about. It's about going, okay, this person's displaying this, this, and this. Does it fit the criteria? Okay. So if it fits the criteria, then we can predict what they might do next, but also how they might react to you. So I think that's the important thing. I use Clive's tool because it is a fairly simplified tool, but it comes from the work of Hare and Cleckley. And because I had Clive as one of my supervisors, I was able to, get constant support from him around making sure I was using it properly. So that meant a lot to me to be able to do that. But also too, because it's specifically for research, I thought that was the best method. And I did do a lot of research on the different tools that are out there because there are a number of them, and felt that that was the best fit for me. Because like I said, I wasn't diagnosing anyone. I was going, right, okay, what are the other examples of them displaying each of these traits? How do they fit? Okay, so they could fit into that psychopathic behavior. And how is this affecting people? I cared more about the impact than I did about diagnosing anyone as a psychopath.
Hmm. And you say when you do your work and when you go in, you do this. Could you walk us through a little bit of what it looks like when you work with a client? Are you brought in as the psychopath hunter?
Um, a little bit. So I've been working for myself for about 6 months now. I'd previously worked as a consultant looking at toxic behaviour in the workplace, and after working for a university and teaching about domestic violence and realising more and more the issues with toxic women, and that there wasn't a lot of support out there for people, I did a few interviews online that created a lot of attention, and people were like, oh my gosh, I'm glad someone's talking about this. So I've decided to now simply look at toxic female behavior in my work, in my consulting. So at the moment, I'm working with a number of clients who are either separated from someone who might have been psychopathic in nature or narcissistic, any part of those dark tetrad traits, so the psychopath, the narcissist, the Machiavellian, or the sadist. Mostly it's the psychopath or the narcissist. What I do is I work with them around, I let them tell me about those behaviors. And it's more of a coaching, counseling role where we go, okay, so they've done this, this, and this. Okay, so this makes sense in terms of the psychopath, or this makes sense in terms of the narcissist. And a lot of it's about validating someone's experience. Many
Yeah.
people are like, nobody's listening to me, nobody understands, I feel like I'm alone. And to be able to say to them, actually, you're not, this is really common. I had a lovely young man I worked with whose mother was a psychopath. And, he said, just listening to your videos on YouTube, but even just chatting to you has really made him feel so much better because he'd spent so many years being downtrodden by his mum that he felt worthless. And just me saying to him, actually, this is not your fault, that these people are out there and they're determined to make you feel worthless. But, helping him identify some of those good things about him, because with years and years of being downtrodden and years of being told how useless you are, it's a real problem. So he was one case. So, and I'd work with a number of people who've either worked in workplaces where they've worked with a psychopath and they're still struggling with the trauma. So just really talking through some of those things that they witnessed. There's a lot of that PTSD kind of behavior where they like keep replaying it. So to be able to validate some of those experiences, I think is really useful for people. I've also worked with people who have been through parental alienation. So parental alienation seems to have mothers who alienate children from their fathers seems to be a massive issue. And I'm often finding that those mothers are very narcissistic or even psychopathic in nature. So being able to help with some of that has been really rewarding, I think, and really helpful because there's no one else out there really doing this kind of work where they're willing to, you go to a therapist and it's like, how did that make you feel? Whereas I'm willing to say, actually, these are the things you've witnessed. Yeah, that's not great. That this person's clearly got a pattern of behavior. This is how you best can deal with this in your day-to-day activity. But like I said, I think much of the success I have is around that validation, people feeling validated because nobody wants to talk about women's bad behavior. Nobody wants to talk about women being toxic. We just want to make excuses. So yeah, I don't make a lot of excuses,
Yeah.
including for myself. I probably should though. Yeah.
Yeah, the validation part of this is tremendous. One thing that I've really noticed with doing these interviews is that I look at the comments that people leave, and so many of them are just, oh, thank you to this expert
Mm.
for validating, my experience on A, B, and C, because this is the first time I've heard this, or, this is the first time I've known for a while, but I haven't been able to quite put it together until you put language to this. So the validation piece is tremendous. I mean, how important do you think that is? Is it a total relief for your clients? Is that really what they're after?
And that's it. Like I can have just one session with someone and they don't need any more. They just simply
Well,
need to be and there's been clients where I've had one session but they've come back for another one. Because it's not really therapy. I don't call it that, but they've come back and they've gone, "Oh my gosh, I had the best week ever or I've had the best fortnight ever because you made me realize." It was like a weight had lifted. It's like they're carrying this weight of this person's behavior and the way they've been treated, and to realize it's not them, to put it back on that person, and to come from a place of forgiveness as well. I'm a Christian, so I come from a really place of, and I know a lot of people don't like that idea, but it's a bit like I always say to my clients, it's a bit like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. By being angry and carrying that, you're actually just hurting yourself. And so I think sometimes when people hear that, they're like, it's almost like a sense of relief that they're like, okay, I need to move past this. By me holding on to this for as long as I have is only hurting me. It's not hurting them. They've moved on. They're already targeted someone else. And I think that's really, really helpful. But I also found that when I did my research, and that was what led me to this work, was that doing the interviews with people, a lot of them said to me, "Thank you. It's the first time I've been able to sit down and talk about this with someone who understands what I've been through."
mhm,
Yeah, it
yeah.
was very, very rewarding to do.
Yes, and your point about forgiveness, I think, is tremendous for the health of people who get through this too. I've had a man on the show named
Mm.
James Kimmel Jr. He's at Yale, and he
Mhm.
researches forgiveness and how it
Okay.
affects people, and revenge, and how that affects people. And the revenge instinct in the human, he finds, is addictive. That you start to fantasize about it, you want more of
Yeah.
it. If you do get revenge, you will just end up wanting more. And he says that the cure, the drug really to fix it, is forgiveness, and that may take many exercises, and it doesn't mean that it happens all at once, and it doesn't mean that you necessarily
Mm.
make amends or let that person ever get close to you again. It's really more about an internal release rather
Mhm.
than continuing the fantasy and the rage and things like that. So, yeah, I can see how
Yeah.
this twofold, being validated and letting go, they probably
Mm.
work together.
Yeah, because hanging on to that is not useful, and it can be so hurtful. And I think, yeah, it's a real release when you just, and they don't need to know you've forgiven them, but that sense of vengeance you're talking about, it can be really harmful because you cannot win against these people. You cannot win unless you have a number of people that want to support you through it. But most people will run and hide, and then you're left alone being the scapegoat. So, coming from a place of distancing yourself and forgiving them at a distance is really useful.
Hmm. In your work, you talk about dyads as well, comparing, okay,
Mm.
there's the female psychopath with the male and the female psychopath with the female and so on. What stood out in terms of the dyads, those gender specific relationships?
Yeah, so there was four dyads, so female to female, female to male, and then male to female and male, and that was who they targeted. So male to female meant the male targeted the female and vice versa. And it was a way of really looking how gender played a role in the targeting. The interesting thing was it was the female to female group that was the biggest problem. I didn't actually find any men who targeted other men in my study, but that might have been because of the industry that I looked at. The interesting thing is, there's studies that say that, I think it's the Workplace Bullying Institute who say that 90% of women that have been surveyed say they've been bullied by another woman in the workplace. Women are way more likely to be bullied by men. Women are way more likely to be bullied by women in the workplace than to be bullied by a man.
How many did you say?
And 90% of women.
90%.
90% of women
So
have
if
been
you have
bullied by another
a
woman.
wife, daughter, sister who's in the workplace, 90% chance she is being bullied by another woman.
In fact, I put it to you that you ask any woman about being bullied by another woman, and you will find it very rare to find a woman who hasn't been bullied by some other woman. Women, the sisterhood is the most amazing thing ever, and I've got a lot of amazing female friends, and I've got daughters, and the relationships I have with them are amazing. But it's that sense of when you're so close to someone, I think it's easy for it to be so difficult as well. So you only need one person with bad behavior. And I think the other thing too is, I think I mentioned earlier about that rejection. So women struggle a lot more with the rejection when they're rejected by another woman. And I think it's the same thing, is that when they are rejected by another woman, they become way more vengeful than if they were rejected by a man not wanting to be friends. That said, there's studies that say that women who are rejected by men romantically are way more vicious in terms of pursuing that man that they wanted. So that's really,
What
really
do you mean by
interesting.
vicious in pursuing?
Okay.
Is it a revenge thing? Are they trying to hurt him, tear him down?
A bit of both. So they want to be in a relationship with him, or they feel so rejected that they want to destroy him. And from a woman's perspective, we have a narrative that says believe all women. So all you need to say is, he assaulted me, and you're immediately believed. There's a case at the moment by a woman by the name of Laura Owens who wanted to date an ex-bachelor by the name of Clayton. And when he didn't want to date her, they'd had one intimate moment. She claimed to be pregnant. She wasn't pregnant. She went public with it, tried to destroy his reputation, destroy his sponsors. And she was quite successful in doing that. And I believe she's now been charged, though, with fraud, because it turned out she was never pregnant. And she'd done this before to other men who had rejected her. So trying to create a tether to another man. So initially she started with the pregnancy, and when after months and months of him rejecting her, she then claimed she'd been assaulted by him. And that's, as a woman, that's really easy to do because we have to believe automatically. And there's so many more ways that women can target men than men can target women like that, because we can do it from a distance in many ways. So, and you see that a lot.
Other ways that you're thinking of, so we can all be a little more aware?
Probably online. That's the other thing. I think online definitely is people women writing big spiels about men. We had an app recently. I think it was. I'm pretty sure it's been closed down now. I think it was called Spill the Tea. You have to correct me on that. But it was all about women who had been wronged by a man. And they'd get on this app and they'd write a big spiel, share their photos, stay away from this man. He's horrible. He's toxic. And it turned out it was just a bunch of women destroying men who rejected them, so they were offended by it. So things like that are a massive issue, is that women will, whereas a man, if he's rejected by a woman, he's not going to get on social media and go, she was really mean to me, stay away from her. I mean, they probably should. Men are probably in way more danger than women in terms of toxic behaviour. But so I think women are more likely to seek vengeance. And there's studies that show that.
Yeah. Well, this vengeance in rejection and dating and things, I imagine happens in breakups as well. So it ties to another one of our audience questions. What are some signs when I'm dating to identify a female psychopath?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. And I really need to do a video on that one. I think that's a whole video. So I think some of the key things are looking at how she treats others, how she talks about her ex, how she interacts with her family. So if someone is distant from their family, I'm always a bit hesitant of that. What's the reason for their family not wanting to interact with them? It may be the family are a problem, not them, but it's about understanding some of those dynamics and understanding who the problem is there. If they constantly complain about their ex-partner, but take no responsibility for whatever happened in that relationship, then that's something to be a little bit wary of. So looking for those cues of, do they have empathy? Are they self-reflective on how they've interacted in relationships before? Keeping your distance until till you know that you can trust them. So not just immediately jumping into a full-on relationship, but get to know them, because over time people will, and it doesn't take that long for people to start to show their true colors. So how do they talk about themselves? Is it all about them all the time? Do they ever talk about any of their downfalls, or is it just complain about everybody else or criticize everybody else? So really just looking for some of those behaviors. Like I said, the interaction with family is always an interesting one, past relationships. But yeah, they're the key things. So looking out for some of those key traits that, and they will come initially across quite likable and lovable, and often are quite attractive in some cases, not in all cases, but yeah. But yeah, they're probably the main things to look for.
And you started with how she treats others and how she talks about her ex. Those sound like they might be self-explanatory, but could we just be clear what you mean by that?
Yeah, so have a look at how she treats others. If you go out with her and her friends, how is she talking to her friends? Does she seem to care about them, or is it all about her? Is she a little bit nasty? Does she have an underlying nasty streak? Um, so looking at how she interacts and how she speaks with others that know her well, who know her behavior. Because with you, she's probably keeping her guard up. When you first meet someone, you're always a little bit fake to some degree. Most people aren't honest from day dot. And so really just looking for some of those things and looking for any little lies. So little things that she might have said or done. Oh, I've got this big trust fund, but I can't access it at the moment. So do you mind paying for dinner? That expectation, some of those, you're seeing a lot of videos at the moment of women who go out on dates just to get a free dinner. Like, they don't actually care about these people. I mean, that in itself is extremely narcissistic. I mean, that's just horrible. These men are going out and dating someone because they want a relationship, and they're just getting used by women who just want a free meal. So it's really hard for men at the moment. I do not envy them at all. But yeah, looking for women who care and are willing to care about you. If you're not well or something's happened to you, how does she respond to that? Does she go, "Oh, I'll just let you deal with it and I'm going to go off and do something else"? Or does she sit there and support you? Does she, look out for you? Does she, make you a coffee and care about you? Those genuine caring behaviors that are called out by the feminists as horrible, are actually really important. The fact that someone is willing to care for you and be there for you. And naturally, women do that. Naturally, women are caring. So if she's not doing that and she's more about her friends and her career, then I'd probably keep your distance.
Yeah. And what about the talking about the ex? Anything specific on that?
Yeah. So sometimes you'll see if women are constantly complaining about their ex, or he was this and he was that, and oh my God. And so how people talk about others is a good reflection of how they might talk about you later, or how they might talk about you when they're annoyed at you. So, like I said, when you're out with that, hanging out with the friend group is a really good indication of getting to know them better. But, what are they talking about? What things are they saying? Are they still complaining about their ex-partner? And that's that vengeance. That's that sense of, I'm not going to let go because I'm the psychopath and I need to win. So not letting go of the past is if there's been a circumstance where they have not won, such as the ex might have rejected them, is something to look for. But if you get the opportunity to talk to people that might know them from previous relationships, that's always quite useful.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about how social media amplifies those sort of things and stuff too. We have one more question from the audience. How is the female psychopath adapting with changes in technology and specifically OnlyFans?
Mm. Oh my gosh, yes. Um, so as I said before, the female behavior really translates well digitally. I think it's Jordan Peterson that I've heard say, it's a real echo chamber for female behavior. You think about the algorithms that are used to push content. So you might be having a rough day. Oh, my husband left me, he's such a pig. And then suddenly you'll start getting all this stuff that validates your experience. So that social media is very validating. Everyone's like, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't believe that happened to you. So then you might start to complain and say, oh, I did this. I burnt all his clothes because I was so mad at him. Oh, good on you, love. That's awesome. So really, it's an echo chamber. It's like
I bet.
seek out, yeah, they seek out, and then the next thing you know, they're burning the house down. No, just kidding. But yeah, that's that real echo chamber. So then there's that sense of it's all about you, girl. You just look after yourself. You do you first. And then that creates this sense of, yeah, okay, I need to just put myself first. Don't worry about my husband or the kids. I need to put myself first because I'm unhappy and it's everybody else's fault that I'm unhappy. Um, so that's the social media side of things. The OnlyFans side of things is very disturbing to me that we've created a society where we've created something that is supposed to be is called empowering by women because they're making millions of dollars, some of the better OnlyFans models, but it's just porn. It is just porn, and it's a way for women to disrespect themselves. They see it as empowerment, but they've created their own prison, basically, because now they have to do this. Now they have to take their clothes off and do these things which are being observed by men. The men that they're trying to avoid. Oh, I don't need the male gaze. But now you're taking all your clothes off to get millions of dollars because it's okay if you do that. So I think we've created it's a really sad space for women to be in because I think they're devaluing themselves um, way more than and how do you then create a good relationship with someone if you've spent the last 5 years taking your clothes off for men all around the world? I think there's a real sense of lack of self-esteem there. I think you convince yourself or you like that it's about empowerment and I'm in control, but you're not. You're actually not. You might be making lots of money, but yeah, I don't think it's a good space for women to be in, but
Mhm.
that's just my theory.
Well, Dr. Fiona Girkin, you are unabashed about being clear about what you really think about these things. For people who want to hear more from you, before we get to our last question, where should they look for you online?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on X at Dr. Fiona Girkin. I'm on Insta at Dr. Fiona Girkin, and I have a website which is www.drfionagirkin.com. So keep it
All right.
simple.
We'll put some links in the description for people to check
Great.
out. And Dr. Fiona Girkin, last of all, what do you think is left to be done in trying to understand female psychopaths?
I think part of it is acknowledgement. I think part of it is the fact that we need to stop making excuses for bad female behaviour. If we don't do that for men, then we shouldn't be doing that for women. This is not about a gender war. This is about stop making excuses for bad behaviour because while we're making excuses for women, they're behaving worse and worse. And, I could sit here for hours listing off cases of the way women have treated their partners, harmed their partners, or harmed their children and have every excuse under the sun. So I think there is more needs to be done, but we need to be able to talk about toxic female behaviour and we need to be able to do that openly and not see it as an attack on women. Just as when we talk about toxic men, it's not an attack on men. It's about specific individuals who are causing harm to others for their own gain.
Hmm.
So that's
Yes.
what needs to be done.
Well, Dr. Fiona Girkin, as you pointed out, this toxic behavior of the female psychopath, it affects everybody. And so for pointing that out to all of us, for your thesis and for taking this interview, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for having me.